want to share with you today is something that has always fascinated me, which is what separates us and what unites us. I've always felt different, very different, but oftentimes what separates us and what unites us is a case of perception. So for instance, when I was quite young, my brother and I felt as if we were the only people that had a single parent family. You know, everyone else had a mother and father except us. At other times, my reason for feeling a bit different or separate is perhaps because of my own unique view of seeing things. Like I used to carry around a piece of material that was tied to string. I called it Cujo. And I used to drag it around and I thought it was a very entertaining pet, but no one else did. And then, of course, there's the more sort of literal explorations like I did when, I was perhaps the only female art student who has explored the notion of gender difference and female identity. But moving on, I guess about 10 years ago, I was exploring what it's like to have a coming-of-age journey. And I explored it in a short story. I wrote about a young villager girl who had an impending coming-of-age ceremony. And the ceremony is forbidden knowledge, so it's not told to anyone. Now, she was so anxious about it coming up and what it might be and what might happen that she ran away from her village and into the nearby forest. And there in the forest is where she experienced a whole lot of trials and tribulations, you know, in the dark wood. So the point of that story was that obviously a coming-of-age ceremony is not something that's necessarily bestowed upon you. It's something that happens out of your actions of what you do. I wrote that story, but then I have another love, which is technology. So I decided to do an adaptation of that story from the perspective of a teenage robot. So instead of having a young villager girl that, ran around the village and into the forest, I had a young teenage robot who connected to her mainframe via a cable that connected to her ponytail. So instead of running around in mud and moss, basically, I had the teenage robot who battled code viruses and algorithms that tried to encode and encase her. But what I did was, rather than replace the adaptations, I had the chapter of the young villager girl and then the next chapter of the teenage robot and moved them one after another. Now, the next thing I did is something that then propelled me on what my passion was for the next 8 years. I was researching what robots are on the web, and I came across something called chatbots. Now, chatbots are a soft AI. They're an artificial intelligence sort of program that you can engineer to have natural language conversations. So for instance, you go to a website, you enter in a bit of text and it comes out with text. So what I realized is that I could actually program this bit of software to have dialogue with my readers. I could actually create my teen bot. My readers could have a conversation with my teen bot. So this greatly excited me. But then the question was, what do I do about my short story of the young villager girl? Do I just push it away and let it go? It was then that I decided that I didn't have to choose between them, that I could have both. I would keep the villager girl story in the book, but I would also have the teen bot story on the web. And that was my moment when I realized that I could have what I love in books and what I love in technology working together, and that my story would be the one that would unite them together. And when I started writing this and exploring this, I realized it was a completely different way of writing. On the one hand, I had the fixed narrative form that once you write it, it's put out there and you can't change it. And on the other hand, I had this incredibly complex interactive narrative form in which I had to try and presume everything that someone would enter into it and come up with all of these different responses. But on top of that, I had to guide the reader from the experience of the book and the intimate experience of turning the pages, get them to go to the web, onto a keyboard, tap in things, have a conversation, and then guide them back to the intimate experience of the book again. It's a beautiful creative challenge. But from that, I saw an area that I wanted to explore. So I did that. And embarked on my journey for the next 8 years of working on other people's projects, developing my own, and conducting my PhD research in this area. Now, one of the things that I discovered in my research was that, of course, there are other artists and other people that have had this similar epiphany. Now, one of those is Dick Higgins. He's an artist who in the 1960s coined a term called intermedia. So I just want to put a quote from Ken Friedman, who is a Fluxus artist. And he described the intermedia movement as describing the tendency of an increasing number of the most interesting artists to cross the boundaries of recognised media or to fuse the boundaries of art with media that had not previously been considered art forms. Now let me just repeat that last statement. To fuse the boundaries of art with media that had not previously been considered art forms. This is an important point. This relates to something which is one of the biggest impediments, it's not the only, but one of the biggest impediments to transmedia actually progressing forward. And that is the idea that some things are art forms and other things aren't. How many times have we heard film is art, games are not? Theatre is important, TV isn't. TV is important, new media isn't. It happens quite often, and this is something that even Higgins actually identified. So I'm just going to quote Dick Higgins now. He said that much of the best work being produced today seems to fall between media. This is no accident. We are approaching the dawn of a classless society in which separation into rigid categories is absolutely irrelevant. It's not necessarily irrelevant, but one of the points that's important to make about this is that some of the more interesting work comes out when each art form is considered equally meaningful. To sort of illustrate how much this is not part of our thinking, I want to draw on a more recent trend, which is called gamification. Gamification is in simplistic terms, is like gamifying life. Its most simplistic iteration is, for instance, you can earn points for doing something on a website or checking into a venue or doing something, at a live event. But it's actually an important cultural movement which describes, the rise of, the cultural form of the game. But I want to put some context to this. For many years, game designers, game players, commentators, academics have been fighting for the game to be recognised as a legitimate art form. It has been put down. It has come to a great pace, but I have to remember that for many years, for instance, games were analysed in academia through narrative theory. It's only fairly recently that we've actually have a field of game studies. The argument was that story is the way that we understand the world, and so we can understand games through story. Now, I don't mean to put a dichotomy between the two, but what I want to highlight is this. Before, the argument was all the world is a story, and now apparently the argument is all the world's a game. Where is the recognition of difference? Why can't we say that some people understand the world via story, some people understand the world via game, some people understand the world via a mix of the two, and sometimes, from something else completely. And this is one of the important messages, from transmedia that I've found. In fact, this is one of the lessons that I've learned from transmedia, and that is each media platform is something that cannot be changed. A TV is a TV, a newspaper is a newspaper, a computer is a computer. It cannot be changed. It has its form. But what changes, what unites us, all of these elements is what you actually put on that content. It's the way the designer and the experiencer perceives what is actually happening. Unity is perceived, but variety is manifest. And this is something that I have seen in discussions of aesthetics over the years. So for instance, throughout time there's been a thread of the notion of what makes something beautiful, what makes something aesthetically pleasing. And oftentimes the words unity and variety is brought up. I just want to quote Gustav Fechner, an experimental psychologist, and he says that an object is apprehended as beautiful to the extent to which it combines a pleasing variety within unity. And even as Stephen has mentioned as well, Richard Wagner, the German composer, and he spoke of Gesamtkunstwerk and his total work of art. And I just want to quote him here. He says that the purpose of each separate branch of art can only be fully attained by the reciprocal agreement and cooperation of all the branches and their common message. He had a lot of political messages that came with his theories as well, but one of his main points was that perhaps the most beautiful art form is all the art forms combined. And so what does this mean for you as broadcasters or anyone who's considering this area when you're coming from sort of a monomedium perspective? I guess with broadcasters in particular, we can think about the notion of mass communication. Although it has possibly not been as effective in the last few years, but the cultural heritage of that is this idea that, one channel can sort of reach everyone. What we have with transmedia is we're saying that each media and each art form is a different way that you can reach different people. You can actually possibly reach the same amount of people or even more, but through their medium and their art form of choice. You can actually, communicate more with that. And so this is one of the things that I wanted to say here, is that if you dare to design transmedia, you will in some ways no longer be a broadcaster, no longer be a filmmaker, no longer be a novelist, because you will be thinking about what unites everything, the message, your story, your game, whatever it is. But in the end, you can actually look to see each particular media and art form as being equal. And that's one of the only ways that this area can actually progress. So when I say dare to design transmedia, what I'm saying is dare to design for a wider embrace. Thank you.